Hey, hello and welcome to another edition of Wicked Problems. Today I'm joined by Ali Nicholl, Head of Engagement at a company called IOTICS. They enable organizations to work cooperatively whilst maintaining sovereignty and control flexibly over their data. By doing this, they empower organizations to rapidly explore, leverage, and exchange data. That exploration and ability to exchange can inspire and accelerate societal change. And when you listen to or watch the episode today, you'll hear us talk about real world problems that IOTICS has helped to solve and will continue to help solve. That said, I hope you really enjoy the show and I look forward to receiving any comments you may have. Welcome, Ali. Thank you so much for being here. It's really great to have you.
Delighted to be here.
IOTICS, tell me a little bit about IOTICS.
Yeah, at IOTICS, we're all about enabling data and information to be rapidly explored and leveraged and exchanged across multi-party ecosystems. We were founded in the belief that more could be done to enable people and communities and companies to come together to cooperate, to tackle, to use the language of the podcast, the wicked problems.
Yes.
These weren't going to be solved by single companies. They're not going to be solved by single organizations. And what you need is the technology shims, if I can put it that way, that you can bring in between all the myriad sources of data, from IoT to big data, through to the consumers of data, so analytics and AI and ML and so on. But you need something in the middle that enables all of this to talk to all of this securely and safely and selectively, allowing people to find information and use that information. And that's where we sit. The rest of the team won't thank me for it, but it's sort of sexy plumbing in terms of enabling the orchestration and routing of data from sources and consumers and back the other way.
Well, that's often what we need, right? That's partly why Adobe came into being, isn't it? Right, because we needed that glue that meant that all the computers could talk to all the different printers and so on, and do it in a unified way. That's a very basic, a very simple example. So excuse me, but it's just kind of making it relevant and
that's absolutely it. I mean, it's the recognition that in order for planet and people to flourish, we have to be able to, with confidence, go out there and work together intelligently and understand the context of what we're doing and understand what impact decisions we make are having, and that impact in, faster than quarterly review meetings. If I change A over here, what's the impact of B over there? And that in order to do that, we have to be able to come together and work. And that's really what we founded the company to do. At the time we started, it was very, this is 10 years ago, it was very IoT focused, so all about devices and connected things. And there were huge numbers, thousands of people making them and hundreds of people developing platforms that managed them and so on. But the question became, how do they work together? All the devices around a city, how do they start coming together? And 10 years ago, so 2014, the prevailing solution seemed to be, well, either governments will set up platforms that will manage them, which seems to me to fundamentally misunderstand what city governments are for, or secondarily, our company will win. I can't tell you how many conferences you and I probably both were at where it was, who's going to win between MBIoT, which is a connectivity solution, and Sigfox and LoRaWAN, and this idea that someone would win, some device would win, and some technology company would win. And we looked at that, and our inventors, Paul Green and Mark Warson, looked at it and said, that can't be right. That can't be how the world works, that one technology company is going to win. One technology company is going to rule it all. That isn't how humans work. We're diverse, brilliant, awkward, creative, inspiring individuals. We have to find a way where instead we can cooperate. We can each have our selfish agendas and our selfish ambitions, but we can find ways to work together that enable us to come together to solve the absolute seemingly intractable problems of our age with regard to global stability, climate resilience, reversing or changing climate change for itself, and making a fairer, freer society for everyone.
So I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but you're talking about people thinking that maybe there would be one company that would win out, right, or become, the company. or governments would step in, and they don't have a very good track record of IT, to be perfectly honest, in the first place, in my experience. But if that were true, I mean, it seems like a naive utopia, and I say that because if that were true, then we wouldn't have Google versus Apple versus Microsoft versus, that wouldn't be the case, would it?
I mean, that is absolutely spot on. And the example that I often use is I have a Chromecast in the back of my TV so that you can broadcast from your phone. I also have an Apple phone. You can't use those two technologies together. I know there is absolutely no technological reason why that's the case. It is just that they won't play nicely with each other. And if we accept that they won't play nicely with each other, and if we accept that most countries, truthfully, rightly, have selfish ambitions for their citizens versus a global citizen, then we have to recognize that we have to accept that that's the reality of the world, that we can't wait for a utopian moment where suddenly everyone will get it, everyone will see the nature of the challenge, and everyone will agree with a common approach. I mean, if we were the sorts of species that believed that commonality was the way forward, things like Esperanto and Volksbund and all those pieces would have worked. We would have said, well, this is a brilliantly logical language that's perfectly constructed, that you can have William Shatner do a performance of in a film. This works. Why doesn't everyone just learn this? Well, because languages have their own beauty and cadence and rhythm, and you can describe different things in them, and they have different concepts of time and distance and space. The Aboriginals of Australia have entire concepts of history embedded in their geography. In the same way, without being too flippant, all of our different data domains have embedded in them specialisms and ideas that are absolutely integral to how the maritime sector works or how specific energy systems work. So you can't create one way of talking about all of them, but you equally must recognize, all of us, that the impact that the maritime sector has on the climate means that we have to understand its pollution and its energy needs. The way we power ports, like Portsmouth International Port, which we might talk about in a bit, comes from our national energy grid, which is using energy from lots of different sources and is going through an energy transition. So even though they are specialist domains, we need the kind of Babel fish, from a kind of Douglas Adams perspective, moment of being like, well, we're each talking our own language, but we understand and can garner enough to be able to communicate and work together.
And that means I've got to be able to share with you the information that you might need that I don't feel is too, that I don't want to have my arms wrapped around too much, or vice versa, and presumably across different industries. So you talked about Portsmouth Harbour there. Yeah. You mentioned them. I think that would be a good one to talk about. It's quite fascinating because it'd be interesting, I think, not only to know what it is you do, but how it is that you do it without you giving away your secret sauce, obviously. But
let's look at Portsmouth International Port, who we've worked with for about the past 4 years, and talk a little bit about how we do that and who's involved. Because one of the things that you mentioned there was what I'm comfortable sharing with. And there is a big socio-technical point to all of this. It's not just technologically how it fits together, but how do we trust, have faith, have confidence in what we're doing? And how do we cooperate the way people do? So Portsmouth International Port are a really interesting example. They're a municipal port, so they're owned by Portsmouth County Council. They have a hugely ambitious target to be net zero by 2035 and emissions free by 2050, completely emissions free as a port. At the same time, and back to that kind of the reality of the piece, they are trying to grow. They are trying to commercially grow. They have really ambitious growth targets as a port for passengers and freight. So they recognize the impact they're having on the environment today and the impact they're going to have on the environment in the future. And brilliantly, I think when you speak to the people over there, people like Ellie Toyer and others, that when a climate emergency was declared, they decided they had to do different things. Not just do things differently, but do different things. And there is a moral imperative, I believe, that if you accept we're in a crisis, you cannot continue as business as usual. So Portsmouth said, look, we need to do something different. We don't know what that is. We don't know which technology mix, the plurality of fuels that people like Ben Fowler at KPMG talk about. We don't know what the mix is going to be, but we know there's going to be something. So they started and they thought it might be hydrogen. So we joined them a project in 2021 to try and bring together 7 companies to share information about whether or not you could use hybrid vessels in the port using hydrogen. And that involved air quality sensors, dashboards, a hydrogen electrolyzer, a boat, the University of Portsmouth, who were doing analysis and data enrichment, and bring them all together to share information. And ordinarily, you've seen them before. These programs take months to get to the point of, I'm happy sharing some information with you. Because what you actually do is you spend your entire time saying, well, what information do you need? And what are you going to use it for? And how are you going to use it? And where are you going to store it? Well, IOTICS were in the room to say, look, take a completely different approach. So the way we work is each organization has its own space. We unsurprisingly call them IOTIC spaces, has its own space that sits as an overlay, an access layer on top of their ecosystem of information. So any individual organization's data and systems and information sets. And it virtualizes those. So within that space, you create virtual versions of the data and assets you have under.
So digital twin, effectively.
Yeah, exactly so. Okay. So our patents refer to them as virtual assets. We now talk about them as digital twins. But when we say in digital twins, it's important that we're not, as you know, we're not talking about visualizations. It's not you have a spinning model of the boat. You say, okay, here's a real boat and here's information from that boat, and we're going to model it using metadata, so data about data, to describe it and say, this is the boat, this is where it is the engine on or off, whatever the information might be. And importantly, each of those spaces is controlled by the owner of that space. So it's, for anyone technical, it's what's called single tenanted. So it's not shared with anyone else. And in their space, they decide, what is it I'm going to model? And then what am I going to share from my space to your space? So we're sat on this call right now, and both of us have blurred backgrounds. And I know the reason I have a blurred background is because I'm a fundamentally messy person, and it is largely chaos behind me here, which thankfully you can't see. But as a result, I'm choosing in my space, in my little box here on the screen, what it is I share with you, what you can see and what you can't see, and what I choose to present. And that there for me solves the point you were making about what do I share and how, because at Portsmouth, what we found was within 12 weeks, people went from, I don't want to share anything, to, okay, well, I'll share some stuff, but only on a weekly basis. Okay, I'll share some stuff on a daily basis, but it will be aggregated or disaggregated in some cases for security reasons. To ultimately, with some of the partners, I'm now comfortable that I'll share it all. And that, again, is how people work, right? When we first meet, I don't tell you everything about where I live or who my kids' names or where they are or what I'm doing. We progressively say, oh, look, Toby and I are building rapport. I'm building trust. Therefore, I'm willing to share more with him at a more granular level. And that's exactly what we allow to do. But through Portsmouth, what we found is that hydrogen as a solution to how they get to their goals actually isn't going to work for them. There were insurance problems. There were storage issues just because of the physical logistics of the site. Hydrogen absolutely is a fuel of the future, but at Portsmouth, it wasn't fit for purpose. So what they've moved to is shore power. And we're now working with ABB and Brittany Ferries and Portsmouth International Port to enable them to look at shore power and how can they use shore power. And when I say look at it, I mean, they've had £17 million of investment from Portsmouth and from the UK government to the Clean Maritime Project to put shore power in. I mean, this isn't a paper-based exercise. This is, let's get shore power, which for anyone, and apologies to anyone who is in the maritime sector, is basically a giant plug. So a ship comes into the port and it can plug in and take energy from the network, so it doesn't have to sit in the port with its engines running. It's called hoteling, where it's running its engines. The ecosystem around that of, well, how do we do that most optimally? How do we make sure that we've got enough power for all of the ships and vessels coming in? How do we balance the load between those vessels? Is a data problem. But it's a data problem that's not owned by a single organization. It's a data problem that's shared between Portsmouth, Brittany Ferries, ABB, B4T, who are doing air quality sensoring. And so as a result, you have to have an ecosystem, a layer in which they can securely and selectively share with each other different types of information for different purposes, so that we can start to see what is the roadmap from where we are to where we want to be in 2035, recognizing that all of those players have their own stakeholders, their own shareholders, and their own ambitions.
And their own place in the ecosystem, I suppose, because you mentioned, so Portsmouth Harbour Authority. Did I get that name right?
Portsmouth International Port, yeah.
Sorry, Portsmouth International Port. You mentioned ABB, who of course do a lot of electronic they do chargers and all sorts of other
Absolutely.
things like that, right? And network upgrades, and you've probably got National Grid in there somewhere in that mix, and so on. And all of these people are providing different parts of the jigsaw, which will have different data anyway. So knowing what to share and knowing what you're prepared to share, and also knowing what you want to consume, are all going to be different factors in there, I would imagine. And you talked about, what am I prepared to share with Ali because I've only just met him versus what am I prepared to share with Ali on the third time we've been for a drink together or something like that, is going to be different. Presumably, then there's different levels of abstraction or different amounts of detail that people are prepared to share. And so it could be that there's public information that they're quite happy to make that public. Doesn't matter who consumes it, down to, well, actually, I'm only going to let a couple of people that I really trust have this information. Is that right?
Absolutely. That is spot on, Toby. We talk about it as a granular or selective sharing piece. So far too often, I think conversations about data or information tend towards open and closed. Either it's all mine and I hoard it, like the dragon from the Hobbit, Smaug, sat on, and if I just have more and more data, and I own more and more data, it will somehow become intrinsically valuable, and then I'm set. But you never actually use it. I mean, the irony of dragons hoarding gold is that they don't engage in the economy at all. They just have it. The other is it's open, which is great, and the Open Data Institute up in Leeds and others are driving. Where it can be open, yes, it absolutely should be open. Ultimately, the reality is that in the majority of cases, there are IP and commercial or security concerns on why I can't share everything with everyone. But I should be able to share selectively with different people. So you and I have a relationship, but you and Bob or Jeff or Susan have a different relationship, and you can share different pieces. And so that point about everyone having their own space is that you can share with your entire network. You can share with a network of networks. You can share with individual organizations. And what you share, you talked about levels of abstraction. I might just share the metadata. I might just say, there is a ship. You can't have any of the data off the ship, but you can know that a ship exists.
Yes.
Alternatively, I might say, well, you can have this feed, but not that feed. This isn't about moving around vast amounts of data. It's about moving around the right data at the right time for the right person to be able to make the decision. And the other piece you said is knowing what I need. And I think it's worth saying that the two kind of problem statements, if you will, that IOTICS is really looking at are the access piece, that's secure, selective, but also the discoverability bit. What is there that's available to me? What can I leverage? In the IOTICS space, we do have open information from the Met Office and vessel tracking and air quality and so on that is available. So how do I find what I need? And there's a set of principles that came out of some work being done in Europe primarily, called the FAIR principles: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. The FAIR principles, it should be findable. You should be describing your data in a way. So we talk about semantics, but for the ones that you should describe your data in a way that machines rather than people can find it. It should be accessible at the right level. So, if it's secure and it's confidential, if it's personnel, we do some work with social services and so on. If it's personally identifiable information, it should not be accessible. It should be interoperable. I should be able to use it between the energy system and the transport system and so on. And it should be reusable. It shouldn't be single purpose. I shouldn't share this information only so you can optimize your schedule. If actually that information could also be used to manage power consumption or track efficiency or update passengers, we can make this information reusable. Then what we have are not only Lego bricks that you can stick together and do what you want with them, but kind of infinite Lego bricks. We can all keep reusing them. There's not one set that can be built. You can endlessly build different things with different people in different ways.
It used to be smart Lego, didn't they? But I wonder if it, in this sense, it's like virtual smart Lego, but it updates itself as well. But so if it's a piece of information about how ambient the temperature is on board the ship, then that would update as the temperature changes, I guess.
So you can update them on whatever velocity you want. It's in your purview. So I might update in real time. I might only update the deltas. I might only share the data. So I don't need to share the constant temperature on the board the ship, but I can register when it's going up or down, and we can then track that against have passengers come on board. Has the climate changed in some way, like as in the local climate?
The local climate.
Yeah, and we can start then to say, okay, well, why might that be happening? What might we be doing with that?
I'm going to come on to that. Actually, we just mentioned climate, and we talked now about harbours and ships and batteries and grids, and it feels like so one of the things we do in this podcast, we talk about things like climate change, the big topic, climate change. We're thinking about things like ESG and so enterprise, social, and governmental policies. These are wicked problems, and they are often they're multinodal. They've got they're very variable spatial data that's required. It's all over the place, and it's not that easily accessible at times. And are you seeing application of the sort of stuff that you do in that area? In that, like, are people able to utilize the IOTICS type of data to help them solve things like climate change issues, or monitor and solve them, or bring their ESG policies, make them more informed, or whatever it is that they're doing? How do you see that?
In a word, yes. We are a purpose-led organization. We want to be the means by which planet and communities and individuals flourish. So ESG is absolutely top dead center, because they are multi-actor problems. And solutions will be multi-party. No one is going to come in and wave a wand and fix it, and no government can do it on its own. So what we see is the gamut being run from work we do in places like Portsmouth. We're also working with Northern Gas Networks. They have a new site up in the northeast, unsurprisingly, near Gateshead, called Futures Close, which they're using as a test bed to test across different types of housing stock, the retrofitting of new technologies, new approaches, new pieces to say, okay, well, how can we reduce the carbon impact of the built environment? And how can we use the data around small subsets of that to work out the best way forward? And the best isn't interesting, because it's not an absolute, to your point on ESG. It's never this piece of technology is going to be the solve for everyone. This type of installation is the solve for everyone, everywhere, all the time. We've got to look at how is it fair and equitable. I was talking to Caroline Flint, the chair of the Fuel Poverty Commission. How can we do this in a way that people don't get left behind and that everyone can be taken with it? Well, we have to share information. We have to share information with charities like National Energy Action, who are working with Northern Gas Networks. We have to work with charities and people like the Committee on Fuel Poverty, who can take information and say, well, these are the levers, these are the dials, because it isn't about there being a right decision. It's about where you choose to set those dials and how you choose to do that. And in order to do that, you need these networks of, in our view, networks of spaces to start federating together. So it's not everything connects to everything. We don't need every satellite connected to every IoT device in a completely granular way. But like a social network, you have within your nodes, you have those popular nodes. There was always that one guy or girl who sits in a number of different groups and starts linking them together. And so not everyone is connected to everyone, but they're all able to be federated together in a network of networks. And that network of networks of spaces or information or sharing starts to enable us to get to the systemic problems. So I'm going out to Singapore, for example, because there is a green corridor between the UK and Singapore looking at the impact of maritime. So how can you link places like Portsmouth and Felixstowe, Southampton and so on with places like Singapore and their onward channel, and start to share information at a governmental level to say, well, what are the right policies and interventions? How can we simulate and test those? How can we register the impact of them as we go along? And in order to be able to do that, you have to therefore be able to query a federated network. You have to be able to look at an ecosystem-wide knowledge base of what you're allowed to see and say, what about this? Can I start querying not just what I know, not just what I know has been shared with me, but can I start querying what is available to me across my ecosystem, across my network, and start getting richer, better informed, better contextualized answers, which I can then make the decision. It's not IOTICS to say this is the right decision. It's IOTICS to say, can we help you get the most contextualized information from the broadest possible ecosystem, so that when you're saying, this is the decision I want to make, you're doing that in an informed way, and you can start to see very rapidly the impact that if I turn, the success of things like Hive and smart meters in the home, other ones are available, was not rich, incredibly detailed data graphics dashboards. I remember talking to, before Hive were Hive, they were Alert Me, and they had a little smiley house on their in-home monitoring thing. And they were like, people want the house to smile. So they would go around turning off plug sockets and things in their house to make the house smile. So that feedback loop of, if I turn off my devices, my energy consumption goes, and some little portal is not giving me all the data I need. It's doing a little bit of analysis, and then I get a little smiley face, and I go, excellent. My house is happy. My bills are lower, etc. And we need that at a systemic level if we're going to be able to encounter these ESG, climate change, climate resilience problems.
I totally agree with you. And what I'm thinking of here is how fast things move nowadays compared to, say, if you go back to 50s and 60s, it was all about management by objectives, and it was 5-year plans, and which sounds a bit Stalin-esque, but anyway, it was kind of like you'd be able to plan your business over 5 years, and actually you'd probably be able to fairly well stick to that plan. It wouldn't be completely exact, but more or less. And then it sort of in the 80s and 90s came down to, well, we can do 1-year plans, but we've got to review them every quarter. But there's still people doing that now, and really the amount of information, the volume of information, and the speed with which it arrives is you can't really plan beyond a quarter now. Basically, you're collecting, and it being, if not real time, very near it. How's that going to affect things like policy making and things like that?
Yeah, and for the avoidance of doubt, we don't want to collect the information. We just route it. I mean, no. I just want to reassure anyone listening, because this isn't about creating another store, because that's non-sustainable computing. If everything gets copied, you can retain control and you just share it when you want to. But I think it absolutely can drive policy, because, let's take a step down into an enterprise and then work back up again. Things about ESG and sustainability and increasingly compliance reporting is that it was described to me by one utility company as sustainability reporting is unsustainable. 2 guys every month or every quarter have to spend a couple of weeks pulling together Excel files or CSV files and creating a look of what's our impact and what we're doing. Yes, it ticks a box for compliance, but it's a cost. Everything is a cost. We've got to spend all that time. If we can bring it in closer to right time, I won't say real time for any real technologists listening in who will say, isn't this over the internet? But if you think about right time, if I can ask the question when I need to know the answer, then suddenly actually I can use compliance and ESG and sustainability reporting as a management tool. And I think what we'll start to therefore be able to see is both a modeling of policy. So using digital twins to model policy, what would if we had this different policy regime against the live data, what would the impact be? What would the outcome be? Who are the winners and losers? Because unfortunately, there are almost always winners and losers. Who are the winners and losers, and where does our dial sit on? But also then, as we start to roll it out, can I more rapidly see the impact it's having, so that we don't have, as we have in some cases, the horror show of, on our annual review, we realized this cohort of people fell through the stool, or these sets of edge cases weren't considered. And as a result, there has been catastrophic impact, which we didn't foresee. So if we can capture that information and share it and leverage it more quickly, selectively and securely and so on, then I think that we can start to have more agile policies. And you mentioned the 5-year plan, and I dare anyone to say a 5-year plan they set in 2019 is what they stuck to and how they delivered it. So aside from the moral imperative we see around ESG, if you as a leader of a business are still doing retrospective reporting-based management, end of a quarter, how did we do? How's our ESG performing? So on. If you're doing 1, 2, 3, 5-year plans that are fixed and lack the ability to flex and evolve as your ecosystem changes around, you are, in my opinion, negligent to your shareholders. Like, forget the moral imperative. I mean, we shouldn't, but forget the moral imperative. Like, if your shareholders are looking at a leadership team is saying, this is the plan, this is inviolate, this is how we're going to work, this is what we're going to do, and you are unable to adapt to societal changes, the fluctuations, the global instability, you are negligent to your shareholders. And when you see that the technology exists to both share, but also with things like AI and LLMs and machine learning to query that information quickly, go across my knowledge base, go across that federated, to use some lingo, knowledge graph, and bring me back the information I need now about what's happening now, and you're not making decisions on that basis, I believe that as a leader, you are being professionally negligent.
But that also gives you the chance to be professionally adept, doesn't it? Because And I think also for policymakers to be professionally become much more adept. Because, if you're a policymaker in government, one of the things you often suffer from is you're having to rely on businesses to kind of tell you things, which means that you're suffering more of a delay than the businesses suffered. And if they're relying on, data that they from a year ago or 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, whatever their horizon has been, I mean, you're really going to be out of date before you even start doing anything. Whereas if you've got all this level of information coming to you now in right time, to go with your phrase, I don't want to annoy any relativists either. But it's going to be right time. That's going to make you able to do policy, I wouldn't say on the hoof, but certainly much more closer to the events that it needs to be made incongruous with.
And where you can focus on the policy making. I mean, Gartner published a report, I think last year, saying that 80% of knowledge workers, so people that work with data and information, informing those policy advisors and directors, spend 80% of their time asking and trying to get access to information which has already been shared with them because it exists on a spreadsheet on someone's laptop or it's somewhere else. KPMG talks about the bottlenecks in transparency and timeliness in data as it increases, which means that there are brilliant, much bigger brained individuals than me, who are doing some incredible things, but who are spending far too much of their time saying, well, where is the data? What's available? How up to date is it? Where's it from? All that metadata, tell me more about the data itself, not just the numbers, so that I can then try and do some analysis on what we might then do. And as you say, suddenly I've spent talking to PhD students, I spend the first 12 to 18 months of every PhD or master's project trying to get access to the information before I can then start looking at what I'm doing. If we're doing that as companies, as governments, as multinationals, as charities, you are always working 18 months out of date. And with the current pace, I don't see how you could possibly be intervening and impacting what you want in the way you want, working with that kind of lag.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can completely see that if you've got the information coming towards you in the best or the shortest time that's really available, between it becoming available and being needing to be consumed, that's got to be a game changer or a winner. We're coming up towards the end of our time, sadly, and I think we could probably sit here and build out cases for this all over the place, and I would quite enjoy that. But if people did want to know more, if they wanted to learn more about the sort of work that you guys do and how you do it, where would they go? What should they look at?
Apologies for the 21st century nature of it, but if you were to go to LinkedIn and look at IOTICS there, IOTICS, IOTICS.com is our website. But also, it's not been as long running or as illustrious as yours, Toby, but we have a podcast. So iotics.com/podcast, where we go out and talk to some of those brilliant people, because this isn't something that we uniquely have a view on. So we go out and find brilliant people who are doing brilliant things and get them on to talk to us about how they're solving. I will have to not use the phrase wicked problems in order to not impinge on what you're doing here, but how they're addressing the real challenges and real solutions. So that's well worth a listen. And I think to some of the people I've referenced on this call, but what they're doing and how they're impacting. And the big call is that it is all doable today. I mean, all of this stuff is not science fiction. It's not, wouldn't it be great if? It's stuff that if we want to, there is an ecosystem of organizations, from data enrichers to interpretation, to visualization, to virtualization, to data access layer organizations like us, who will and do work together to deliver meaningful change.
I think that's great, because I think the world needs meaningful change. That's you might see it on the front page of this podcast. One of the only constants is change. That's Heraclitus, wasn't it, from 500 BC or something like that? I wasn't there, so I do. But and it's true, and change is ever. The pace of it's ever faster, and we are in a critical time. And by all means, use the phrase "wicked problems." It's a defined term; it's not mine. But we thought it was a good name for the show, and they are wicked problems, and we've got to address them. And if we just sit around waiting, well, the danger with that is we all sit on our hands, sitting around waiting, and nothing happens. So, the call to action, I think, really is let's get on with it, and let's engage with networks like yours, with companies like yours, with the sorts of people that you're talking about, with the big brains out there, and let's get on with and try and solve these problems before we find that we have been sitting on our hands too long. So thank you for your time. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show.
Toby, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.